At my birthday dinner, my mom said. You're the embarrassment of this family. I smiled and said, Then why are you eating food? And walked out. Minutes later, my phone blew up. It was supposed to be a celebration. My birthday dinner, at a fancy restaurant my mom insisted on, no less, was meant to be the rare occasion where our whole family would come together without bickering, without veiled jabs about my job, my single status, or the way I lived my life. But I should have known better. As soon as I walked into the dimly lit dining room of La Rosa, I felt the tension tightening around my chest like a vice. My mother, Victoria, was seated at the head of the long table, her signature faux pleasant smile plastered across her face. My father, Jim, sat beside her, nose buried in his phone. My sister, Rachel, flitted around greeting extended family members, her voice syrupy and sweet. I was just about to take my seat when my mother caught my eye. Her lips curled into something between a smirk and a sneer. There he is, she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. The embarrassment of the family has finally arrived. I froze. Conversations at the surrounding tables stuttered to a halt, eyes flicking toward me like knives. The clink of silverware on fine china punctuated the sudden silence. My stomach churned, but I forced a tight smile and moved to sit down, pretending I hadn't heard. But my mother wasn't finished. You should have seen him last week, she continued, her voice ringing with exaggerated amusement. Trying to fix that leaky faucet on his own. A plumber's son, and he can't even handle a wrench. If that's not an embarrassment, I don't know what is. The air was thick with awkwardness. My aunt shifted uncomfortably, my cousin let out a nervous chuckle, and my sister's lips curled into a smug grin. My father cleared his throat but didn't look up from his phone. I realized then, this wasn't just about a leaky faucet or me showing up a little late. It was about years of gaslighting, years of being their scapegoat, years of my mother holding me up as the family punchline. And tonight she was doubling down in front of everyone. But what she didn't know was that I'd come prepared. For once, I wasn't going to crumble under the weight of her words. I had a plan, a quiet, calculated plan that would make tonight unforgettable. And as I sat down at the table, I smiled to myself, knowing exactly what I was going to do. As I settled into my seat, I could feel the weight of their stares. My mother's voice still echoed in the back of my mind, but I forced myself to focus on the glass of water in front of me, tracing the condensation with my finger. The appetizers arrived, artful arrangements of bruschetta, shrimp cocktail, and delicate slices of smoked salmon. The conversation at the table shifted toward Rachel's recent promotion, how her boss just adored her, and how she was finally getting the recognition she deserved. My mother beamed at her, lavishing praise that felt so performative it almost made me laugh. Between bites of her salad, she shot me a look and added, You could learn something from your sister, you know. She's always known how to make a good impression. I felt my fingers tighten around the stem of my glass, but I kept my expression neutral. Instead of snapping back, I offered a small nod, the kind that says I'm listening, but I'm not biting. That's when it happened. My phone buzzed softly in my pocket. I slipped it out just enough to glance at the screen, a text from a number I recognized, the restaurant's manager. Card pre-authorized and instructions confirmed. Ready when you are. I felt the smallest flicker of satisfaction. This wasn't just a dinner for me. It was the beginning of my exit. The entrees arrived, filling the air with the rich scent of seared steaks, roasted vegetables, and buttery fish. Everyone oohed and awed over their plates, but I'd barely touched mine. I was too focused, too aware of the moment that was approaching. As I pushed my food around my plate, my mother turned her attention back to me, her voice suddenly syrupy. Oh, come on now, aren't you going to eat? You're embarrassing yourself even more by letting your food go cold. There it was. The final twist of the knife. I set my fork down deliberately, dabbed at the corner of my mouth with the napkin, and met her eyes. My pulse was steady now, my heart oddly calm. Mom, I said softly, my voice carrying just enough for everyone at the table to hear. If I'm such an embarrassment to this family, then why are you eating food I paid for? Her expression froze. The smile slipped off her face, replaced by a stunned, almost comical silence. The rest of the table stilled, forks hovering midair, eyes wide with shock. Even Rachel's smug grin vanished. I stood up, straightened my jacket, and glanced around the table. "Enjoy your dinner," I said evenly. "It's on me tonight. Consider it my parting gift." I stepped away from the table, my steps slow and measured, feeling a strange sense of clarity washing over me. The murmur of the surrounding diners seemed to fade into a soft hum as I walked toward the exit. What no one at that table realized was that I wasn't just leaving, I was leaving everything behind. As I stepped outside into the cool evening air, the weight that had pressed down on me for years seemed to lift, just a little. The quiet hum of the restaurant faded behind me, replaced by the distant sounds of traffic and the soft rustling of leaves. For the first time in a long while, I could hear my own thoughts clearly. My phone buzzed again. I slipped it out and glanced at the screen, a flurry of texts and missed calls already piling up. I knew exactly what they were. Pleas from my mother. Angry demands from my father. Snide comments from Rachel. And probably a few texts from family members who weren't even at dinner but had already gotten the blow-by-blow update. I let it ring, let it buzz. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a response. Instead, I stood there for a moment, breathing in the night air, watching as a few couples strolled past on the sidewalk, unaware of the quiet victory that had just unfolded inside. And then I remembered the second part of my plan. Earlier that afternoon, while they were all busy fussing over reservations and table placements, I had made a call to the restaurant's manager. I wasn't about to storm out and leave them with a bill they could wave over my head later. No, I wanted it to be clear that I wasn't running away. I was rising above it. I'd paid for the entire dinner in advance. Every last glass of wine, every overpriced steak, every dessert they'd ordered. I even made sure to leave a tip that was generous enough to make the staff smile. But I'd added one last touch, a small, elegant card, handwritten and slipped into an envelope, to be delivered after I left. It simply read, "Dinner courtesy of the embarrassment of the family. Enjoy the meal." I imagined the moment it would arrive at the table. The stunned silence. The shift from smug superiority to quiet embarrassment. I could almost see my mother's face, flushed with shock, her hand fluttering to her mouth. Rachel's wide eyes. My father's gritted teeth. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity. About walking away from the toxic cycle of guilt and gaslighting that had defined my place in this family for too long. I turned away from the restaurant and began to walk down the street. My phone vibrated again, and I ignored it. I knew the texts would only get more frantic. First the shock, then the guilt, then the anger. I could almost write the script myself. But for once, I didn't care. I walked a few more blocks, feeling the cool breeze graze my skin, carrying away the last remnants of the restaurant's thick air and their accusing stares. My phone was practically pulsing in my pocket now, vibrating with new messages every few seconds. When I finally pulled it out, the screen was lit up with a combination of texts and voicemails from my mother, father, Rachel, and even a few other relatives who weren't at dinner but clearly had already been briefed. "Come back right now. You're making a scene. You're ruining your mother's birthday dinner. How dare you embarrass us like this? Apologize. Now." I stood still on the sidewalk, leaning against a lamppost, watching the texts roll in like a tide of desperation. And then, just as I was about to silence my phone, a new message popped up, a name I didn't expect. Olivia. My cousin from out of state. One of the few family members who had always been a little distant from the drama but had quietly offered me understanding glances during tense family gatherings. I opened her message. "I saw your post. Just wanted to say I'm proud of you. It's about time someone said something. If you need anything, I'm here." For a moment, I felt the familiar sting of emotion rising in my chest, but it was different this time. It wasn't shame, or anger, or frustration. It was something lighter, something I hadn't felt in years, validation. I'd almost forgotten about the post. On my way to the dinner, I'd written a short, honest message on social media. Nothing dramatic, just a few lines explaining how, for years, I'd been made to feel small, how tonight was the last straw, and how I was finally reclaiming my life. I hadn't expected much. Maybe a few likes from friends who knew me well. But as I scrolled, I saw it had already been shared dozens of times, comments piling up with words of support. You deserve better. Proud of you for standing up for yourself. This hit me right in the heart. I've been there. I hope you know you're stronger than they'll ever be. Each message was a small crack in the fortress of guilt and manipulation that had been built around me for so long. I stood there for a long time, scrolling through the comments, letting each word chip away at the narrative my mother had tried to write for me. They couldn't control the story anymore. Not after tonight. The next morning, I woke up to find my phone practically glowing on the nightstand. The sheer number of notifications was almost comical. Messages from friends, old classmates, even people I barely knew were flooding in with words of support, encouragement, and a few stories of their own toxic family encounters. I scrolled through them slowly, letting the realization sink in. I wasn't alone. There were people who understood, who'd been through their own silent battles, and who saw in my story the courage they wished they had found, or maybe the validation that their instincts about their own families were right. But it wasn't just texts and social media. My phone rang, my boss. For a moment I panicked. Had my mother reached out to him? Had she tried to twist the story into a dramatic family feud to embarrass me professionally? I answered hesitantly. Hey, just saw your post, he said without preamble. His tone was casual but kind. Listen, if you need a few days off to clear your head, just let me know. We've got your back here. For a moment, I was speechless. No guilt-tripping. No shaming. Just support. Thanks, I said quietly. I really appreciate it. After hanging up, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring out the window as sunlight streamed in through the blinds. My mind was a quiet hum of disbelief. For years I had convinced myself that standing up to my family would mean being alone. That they'd cut me off, isolate me, make me feel like a pariah. But here I was, more connected than ever, buoyed by people who truly cared, not because they felt obligated by blood, but because they saw me. And then my phone buzzed again. This time it was a string of increasingly frantic messages from my mother. This has gone far enough. You've embarrassed us all. You need to take that post down right now. I can't believe you'd air family issues in public. You're making this worse than it needs to be. Apologize and fix this. I let the messages sit there, unanswered. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to explain myself, to soothe her ego, or to play the dutiful child. Instead, I typed a new message, one that I posted for everyone to see. I'm done carrying the weight of other people's expectations. If you think my speaking the truth is embarrassing, then that's your burden to carry, not mine. I choose peace over guilt, honesty over silence, and self-respect over shame. I'm finally free. I hit post and set my phone down. Let them react. Let them spiral. I wasn't going back. I spent the rest of the morning in quiet reflection, sipping my coffee by the window and watching the city come alive below. I didn't feel triumphant or smug. I just felt light. Like a weight had finally lifted off my shoulders, one I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying for so long. Then, just as I was about to start my day, the phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't my mother's desperate texts or the onslaught of notifications from social media. It was a call from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Hey, it's Uncle Dave, the voice said. I just wanted to say I saw your post. I had no idea things were so bad. If you ever need anything, you call me, okay? I almost dropped the phone. Uncle Dave, my mother's older brother, had always been distant, the quiet observer at family gatherings. He wasn't the type to get involved in drama. But now, here he was, offering me something I'd craved for years, unconditional support. Thanks, Uncle Dave, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I really appreciate it. And he wasn't the only one. Throughout the day, more calls and messages trickled in from cousins, old family friends, and even distant relatives who'd seen my post. Some expressed shock, others apologized for not realizing what I'd been dealing with. A few even shared their own stories of dealing with difficult family dynamics. It was like a dam had broken. For so long, I'd been the quiet one, the one who endured in silence. But now, my story had given others permission to speak their own truths. I realized then that this wasn't just about me. It was about breaking the cycle. About showing others, friends, family, even strangers, that it was okay to stand up for yourself. That you didn't have to keep playing a role in someone else's twisted narrative just because you shared a last name. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city, I received one more message, this time from Rachel, my sister. "Look, I don't know what you think you're doing," she wrote, "but you're making Mom really upset. Can't you just apologize and stop all this? It's family, for God's sake." I stared at her message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. And then, calmly, I typed out my reply. "Rachel, I'm not the one who should be apologizing. I'm just done pretending everything's fine. If you can't understand that, then maybe it's time we stop pretending we're family." I hit send and felt an almost serene sense of closure. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the pressure of expectation weighing me down. There were no frantic texts from my mother that I felt obligated to answer, no desperate phone calls pulling me back into their web of guilt. Just silence, and it was the most peaceful sound I'd heard in a long time. I made myself a real breakfast, eggs, toast, coffee, the works. Something I hadn't taken the time for in forever. As I sat down at the kitchen table, I glanced at my phone. There were still dozens of unread messages and missed calls, but I didn't feel the urgency to check them. Instead, I opened my social media account, the one that had become the battleground for this whole ordeal. The post from the night before had gone viral, hundreds of shares, thousands of comments. Strangers from across the country, even the world, had chimed in with words of support, solidarity, and stories of their own experiences with toxic families. One comment stood out to me, though. It was from someone named Hannah, a woman I didn't know but who seemed to understand exactly what I was feeling. "You're not just walking away from them," she wrote. "You're walking toward yourself. That's the bravest thing anyone can do." I reread her comment a few times, letting the words sink in. She was right. I wasn't just leaving the dinner table or the toxic dynamic. I was stepping into the life I deserved, the one where I was the author of my own story. Later that day, I took a walk around the city. It was a crisp, clear afternoon, the kind of weather that made everything feel new. As I passed by the restaurant where it had all unfolded, I felt no bitterness or regret. Just a quiet, almost tender sense of release. The staff must have remembered me because the hostess gave me a small smile and a nod as I walked by. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like an acknowledgement, a silent affirmation of what I'd done. I spent the rest of the day doing things for myself. I read a book, went to a cafe, even called a few friends I hadn't seen in a while to make plans. It felt like I was rediscovering who I was beyond the weight of my family's expectations. And that night, as I lay in bed, I realized something else. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter or vengeful. I was just free. The next few days brought a predictable wave of fallout. My phone kept buzzing with notifications from numbers I didn't recognize, friends of family, distant relatives, even a few of my mother's acquaintances who had apparently taken it upon themselves to mediate. Each message was some version of, "Don't you think you're being too harsh?" or, "It's still family, you know." But I was done with guilt. With each message, I felt a quiet, steady resolve settle deeper into me. And then came the call I knew was inevitable, my father. It wasn't a panicked barrage of texts or a guilt-laden voicemail. It was a simple call that I let ring through once, then twice, before I answered. "Hello?" I said, my voice calm. "Listen," he began, his tone gruff and low. "This has gone on long enough. Your mother is beside herself. She hasn't eaten, she's not sleeping. You need to fix this." I almost laughed, but I held it in. "Fix this?" I didn't break it. There was a pause on his end, then a low sigh. "You've made your point. Now come home. Let's put this behind us." "Put it behind us?" I repeated, my voice tightening. "Dad, do you even hear yourself? You've watched this happen for years. You've watched her tear me down, humiliate me, and you did nothing. Now you want me to come back and pretend it never happened? I'm not doing that." He was silent for a moment, as if weighing his words. "It's not that simple," he finally said. "It is," I replied. "For the first time in my life, it's that simple. I'm not playing this game anymore." And then, almost as if he knew he was losing his grip, he said, "You'll regret this. Family is family. You're choosing outsiders over us." I let his words hang in the air, feeling the weight of them. But instead of the familiar rush of guilt or fear, I felt only a quiet clarity. "I'm choosing me," I said. "For once, I'm choosing me." I hung up before he could respond. That night I lay in bed, phone still buzzing with messages I refused to read. I turned it off and let the silence embrace me. I realized then how long it had been since I'd truly rested, since I'd felt peace without waiting for the next jab, the next snide comment, the next demand. And in that silence, a new thought formed, something that hadn't even occurred to me until now. I was free to decide what came next. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Instead of scrolling through social media or bracing for another round of guilt-laden messages, I reached out to friends I hadn't seen in a long time. People who had always been in my corner, but who I'd kept at arm's length because of the constant pull of family drama. Within hours, I had plans lined up: a dinner with an old friend, a weekend road trip, even a chance to volunteer at a local charity. For once, my life wasn't being dictated by my family's whims or manipulations. It was mine to shape, to fill with people who cared about me not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And then, almost like clockwork, a new wave of messages arrived. But this time, they weren't from family. They were from people I'd never expected to hear from. A cousin I barely knew reached out to tell me how much my story had resonated with her. A coworker messaged to say he admired my courage. Even a distant friend from high school sent a simple message: "Thank you for sharing this." It gave me the strength to stand up for myself, too. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about me. My story, the years of being the family scapegoat, the breaking point at that dinner, the quiet but decisive walkout, had become something bigger. It was a spark for others trapped in similar cycles, a quiet permission to say enough. I felt a calmness settle over me, not the false peace I used to chase by pleasing everyone, but a true, deep sense of self-respect. I was no longer their embarrassment. I was my own person.